Vanessa, Awal, I've got a question for you. I saw my brother at the weekend and he told me, or rather we found out, that my dad wants to buy him a ladder for Christmas, which got me thinking, what's the most boring present you've ever received?
A present which wasn't boring, but it was very expensive. I received a watch which I didn't need, but it was expensive. Yeah.
You're just showing off now, Awal. You're just showing off.
But that's the truth. You do get things you don't need, but
you don't need.
it's expensive. Yeah.
I'd take a watch over a ladder any day of the week.
I think mine's probably very boring, but bed socks.
Functional.
I know, and I'm always cold, but no, don't wear bed socks. My dad once bought my mum in their early days of marriage a washing machine for Christmas. He didn't do that again.
Hello, I'm David Eudall, and welcome to Agonomics, a weekly look at the economics of agriculture. In this episode, we're going to talk about our Halal Consumer Research Report, a piece of work that aims to improve understanding for farmers, processors and the retail trade of consumer habits and purchasing preferences, in the hope it will help drive sales and protect British farming. And here's a stat for you. Did you know Muslims make up around 6.5% of UK population, and we at AHDB estimate that they account for 30% of lamb sales? Joining me to discuss the report are Senior Halal Manager Awal Fuseini and Retail and Consumer Insight Manager Vanessa Adamson. Please follow or subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode. New shows drop every Wednesday at midday, and please get in touch. Comment on any of AHDB's social channels or email us agonomics@ahdb.org.uk and let us know where you're listening. So we've emotionally got over the departure of our previous presenter, Mr. Jack Watts, formerly of this parish and now an ardent listener, who got in touch at agonomics@ahdb.org.uk to say that it was great to see the 2030 work coming to fruition. The team put a lot of hard work into it, and it's an important benchmark for the industry. And given the scale and number of variables involved, it's great to see AHDB facing into the challenge in a transparent and methodical way. Oh, he's asked some questions as well, more than one question, about why beef prices being near record levels and why is domestic production continuing to consolidate, and we will answer those in good time, Jack. Don't you worry. Thanks for still sending work our way. We've got another mystery music act for you to identify in this episode. We'll be dropping in a few song titles as and when we can, and we will reveal all at the end of the show. So, as we said in the intro, we are here this week to talk about our Halal Consumer Research Report. And I think before we get into the details of what the report says, I think we need to get kind of a headline view of actually, and that sort of explanation of what halal is. Because, Awal, I think there's probably a lot of either lack of knowledge or misunderstanding or misconceptions about what halal is. So start us off on the right path. Can you just give us that sort of headline view, that basic introduction? What is halal and what does it mean?
Yeah. Thank you, David. So halal is an Arabic term which means anything that is permissible. So for Muslims to consume meat, they believe that it's a commandment from God for them to consume meat that meets their religious criteria. And when I say religious criteria, it's almost the same method of slaughter as conventional slaughter. So the majority of sheep in the UK, for instance, will be restrained the same way, whether halal or non-halal, will be stunned the same way and will be bled the same way. The only exception is that they prefer that a Muslim do the bleeding of the animal.
Right. I like that we've got that as we're all working off the same knowledge now. So Vanessa, if I come to you now, so we know, I mean, we'll talk more about, I suppose, the importance of halal as we go through from a market perspective. But why now with this report and this research? You know, what's the background to it? Why have we gone into it, and what are we trying to achieve?
Well, we decided the last time we did halal research, consumer research, was back in 2018. And obviously there's been a lot of changes since then. We've endured COVID, cost of living crisis, and different trends within the meat and farming industry. So we decided it was definitely time these days to commission a new report, which is what we did earlier in 2024. The report was conducted by a research company called the Smithfield Collective, and they did a quant and a qualitative study with 1,000 consumers, both online and face-to-face, and then also did an in-depth study with 20 consumers where actually they went into their homes. These consumers did a 7-day food diary, and also we did an accompanied shopping trip with them to their local store where they buy their meat. So it was a very in-depth study, and that provided us with what their purchasing habits are, what they believe about meat, and also how these have changed over time.
So for our levy payers, I think the research is timely in a sense that many levy payers are looking to access the halal market. So they want to understand the consumption behavior, the shopping behavior, the type of animal proteins that Muslims are consuming. So this research is timely in the sense that levy payers are looking for that information.
And I suppose that's what we want to do with this kind of work, isn't it? Is to actually help that, it's kind of like putting oil in the engine of the market, isn't it? To help it run smoothly so everyone has that fair understanding, that information that they can then base their business decisions off, considering that we know that, halal for lamb sales is a significant part of the market, isn't it, Awal? It's a
Correct.
significant proportion of what we trade, both obviously from a domestic perspective, but also you do a lot of work internationally as well, don't you?
Yes, that's a good point, because lamb consumption is part of Muslim culture. So many Muslims prefer to welcome their guests with lamb, and it's also heavily featured in most of their religious festivals. So yeah, such information is useful to guide our levy payers on which market to access and what products to access with those in those markets.
So Vanessa, we'll go through it in more detail as we go through, and we can talk about it. But what would you say are the key headlines and the key messages from this report?
I would say, I think like we've touched on briefly earlier, is that, Muslims account for about 6.5% of the population, but actually consume 30% of lamb consumption, according to our latest estimate based on this research. Well, in our last research, like we say, back in 2018, we estimated that was around 20%. So that is a massive jump in how important the halal market is for especially the lamb, but also the beef industry as well. So yeah, the key highlights, I would say we've come out of this, we've established that really the Muslim consumer splits into two, really, in terms of a more established consumer, where they are more traditional in their views and their behaviours and their attitudes. And what we've found is they typically live in more well-established communities. They generally live more in a larger family group, and potentially have one person maybe not working in the home. So potentially have more time to cook more traditional meals. Their shopping habits are very much traditional. They go to their specialist butcher. It's more of a social occasion, and they like cooking. They've got that repertoire of meals that they cook at home, and it's very much a big family occasion. But on the other hand, we've seen now the second consumer group, we've labelled them emerging consumers. These are generally more younger consumers. They're used to more living in the Western context. Generally, they're more of a working, say, family. So they have a busier lifestyle. And they are more embedded now in more westernised cultures. Still very much purchase halal meat, but they are probably more erring towards going to the halal counter in the supermarkets that you can see nowadays, and maybe more buying pre-packed halal meat on shelf. So theirs is very much centred around convenience lifestyles, and it's got to fit in with their lifestyles. And also they told us they like the idea of cooking, but a bit limited on time. So they're looking for inspiration, which is maybe, more in tune with Gen Zs nowadays, looking to social media for inspiration on lamb recipes, beef recipes, and they're not averse to eating chicken nuggets and lasagnas and fajitas, very much in tune with the general population. So it really was a split there, which was quite interesting to see. As part of this research, we've seen 80% of Muslims say they eat lamb regularly on a weekly basis, and this compares to the general population of actually only 6% eating lamb weekly. This is also in line with Muslims eating more beef, lamb and chicken on a weekly basis compared to the general population. So that just shows us how important Muslims are to the farming industry and protecting our industry. We also see that the key cuts that they buy are, say, within lamb and mutton, are chops and mince, because they're very versatile. But if they're having larger family groups, family gatherings, they're more likely to be buying cuts, say, lamb legs, lamb shoulders. And as Awal touched on, festivals and celebrations are really a big part of the Muslim faith, and lamb as part of those occasions are really important.
So it's important for processors to understand the shopping behavior of the emerging and also the established consumers, because we know that in both cases, they have a preference for where they buy the product from. But what is very, very important among the two categories is that both the established and the emerging consumers prefer to shop in independent Muslim butchers. And the reason for this is that they are both looking for assurance that the product they are buying is authentically halal. So what I would say to processors, levy payers, is that if you are selling halal, you need to find a way of communicating the level of assurance of your product to the consumer. So you can do this by using what we call a halal certification body. To do that, they can easily communicate with the consumer. Or you can have a halal counter that is operated by somebody who understands the rules of halal, so that Muslims can shop there, whether emerging generation or the established generation, they can shop in your premises with confidence.
I've noticed that just in my shopping habits. So the Asda down the road that way, as I point, but no one can see me pointing on a podcast. Just in South Leicester, that opened a halal counter, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, and it's grown. It's definitely grown. It started off as a small counter, and now it's kind of taken more shelf space as it goes along. So you can definitely see that shopping habit of people moving more into kind of like the larger retailers has changed. I suppose as a question, Awal, do you see that as something that's, I suppose, a continuation of everything going forward? Do you think that kind of trend is going to continue?
I think it will continue. And in 2008, research conducted by one of the halal academics found that many Muslims were not even aware that the mainstream retailers sold halal at the time. So what retailers need to do is have that counter, have somebody there who understands the halal rules. And in doing that, they are not just attracting people to come and buy meat, because when people come in and buy meat, they also shop other products. So I think the trend will continue, and it's something that retailers need to be aware of.
It's interesting, actually, that you mentioned that in terms of buying other products, because that's something that we saw earlier in the year when lamb sales were being heavily discounted, both from a halal, non-halal perspective as well. And that was actually because the value of the shopping basket of everything else they bought outweighed everything else. So it is, though, as you were saying there, Vanessa, it's the purchasing of everything for those wider meals. That's the thing that essentially drives people through the doors, isn't it?
Just to touch on that, as part of the research, and I personally went on a couple of these shopping trips, was that the consumers did say that when you look at the pre-packed halal meat on shelf, it's just very clear, and to be honest, boring. And AHDB are doing a lot of work at the moment in reinventing meat labelling and, creating noise. Well, there is a large bit of work to do, like Awal says, around the meat, what it looks like, halal meat, within these supermarkets as well. So, I'm sure that's something we will be working on to create, more of an occasion, make the halal meat in supermarkets more attractive.
Yeah, when we're talking about such a significant proportion of domestic demand, it's something that needs to be taken seriously. Right, we're going to take a short break now to get the latest in the markets. You may have been listening out for a song title. I don't remember getting one in, but don't worry, keep the faith. We're going to get them in the next time. I always believe that we're able to come back good and do more in the second half. I think we just need to kind of get into the rhythm of it, don't we?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Olivia Bonser, Senior Analyst at AHDB, with a look at grain and oilseed markets for the week commencing the 6th of January. Despite some support in wheat markets over the Christmas period, prices have been under pressure in the new year from a strengthening US dollar, technical selling and sluggish global demand. However, Russian wheat crop conditions remain in focus. with warmer than usual temperatures and excess moisture in key growing regions. Persistent hot and dry weather in Argentina is also raising concern over the country's maize crop, which is now in its critical development stage. For rapeseed, new crop prices are supported, with doubts over prospects for global rapeseed production in 2025, though forecasts of heavy soybean supplies from South America limit any major price increases. Over the next few weeks, weather in major exporting countries such as South America and Russia will be key in driving prices. The USDA will also release updated global supply and demand estimates at the end of this week. To stay up to date with the latest data and analysis across arable, red meat and dairy markets, head to hdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
If you're in the market for another podcast to subscribe to, then look no further than our Manager's Special, AHDB's Food and Farming podcast. Recent episodes include a consumer insight offering on red meat labels and supermarket aisles, as well as a dairy special about our work with retailers to promote milk. If you're after herbs, or rather herbal lays, our shelves are stacked with sage advice on how to introduce lucerne and clover into your fields. In fact, we cater for all tastes, so you'll find sections dedicated to all sectors: pork, cereals and oilseeds, dairy and beef and lamb. And don't forget our middle aisle, where you can often pick up a bargain episode you didn't know you needed to listen to. Search Food and Farming wherever you get your podcasts. AHDB thanks you for your custom.
Welcome back to the second part of Agonomics, and in this episode we're talking about halal consumer research with Awal and Vanessa. And something that I was thinking about, Vanessa, as we were going through that first part, we were talking about consumption patterns. And obviously over the last 3 years, really, we've seen strong inflation and strong food price inflation. We've seen at times a drastic change in consumer behaviour driven by those higher prices. And obviously people moving between protein categories, so moving away from red meat, moving into chicken because it's been more cost effective and more variable in terms of how it can be used, etc. Is that something that we've seen within the halal sector as well?
Yeah, we were keen to find this out because, like we say, rising prices have hit pretty much everybody. Red meat has been affected by this trend. And also, we're aware that health concerns are a factor here. So we did want to question the halal consumers, and 34% of them said they were actually buying more red meat over the last 2 years. But conversely, 12% said they were actually cutting back due to costs. So we compared this with our YouGov tracker, which is for the whole population. And actually, although 12% of the Muslim population said they were cutting back, that's less than the 20% of the general population cutting back for cost reasons. So it is interesting, cost is a big concern to, like we say, pretty much everybody nowadays. But yeah, Muslims still see that red meat is a vital part of their diet. But yeah, when we compared this with the emerging group was slightly more concerned about maybe health. We're all subjected to this. We're all aware of the trends nowadays and all hopefully looking after our health as a priority. But yeah, Muslim consumers very much are meat is a staple part of their diet. So it was less of a concern for them.
That was coming back from what you were saying in that first half, especially what you mentioned, Awal, about it kind of being that occasion and being that kind of almost formality for a lot of Muslim consumers, that it's just part of that formality of welcoming people into their house, etc. So it's a hugely important thing. I guess the interesting thing there that we're talking about, like thinking longer term now, like we did this report 5 years ago and then we've returned. Where are we going to be? And this is, I suppose, in terms of thinking about our levy payers from both a farming perspective, because I'm thinking of them in terms of the length of time of the production cycles of red meat, etc., as well as a processing business in terms of planning. We've started to see those trends. I would imagine that we're going to continue to see those trends in change in the the purchasing differences between the more sort of established purchasers versus that younger groups you were saying, Vanessa. Do you think that'll be more emphasised as time goes on? That obviously that younger group will be growing, and therefore is their purchasing habits going to be taking more prominence within the halal sector if we kind of cast our mind forward 5 or 10 years?
I think it is very, very much. And a key finding from our research was that although they're very much driven by convenience, which a lot of the population are nowadays, have less time to cook, is coming out within a lot of our research, is there's still very much of a desire there. Meat is part of their culture, and that they do want to cook. And it is, where do they look for that inspiration? So we say, Gen Zs do look towards social media more nowadays, but cookbooks still very much have a role, and there are obviously influences online nowadays. And AHDB, if you go to the AHDB website and look at simply beef and lamb, there's a lot of recipes on there for beef and lamb recipes. So there is that desire. It's just how do we get to these people and get them to influence the cooking decisions?
Yeah, so in terms of what Vanessa has said, and the question you asked about the growth of the younger consumer, yes, from research, we know the younger consumer is relatively higher than the general population if you compare Muslims and non-Muslims in the UK. And one of the biggest thing is health. They believe reducing meat consumption will improve health. I just came from hospital recently, and I was actually told to eat more meat and dairy. So we need to be able to communicate to the consumer that eating meat and dairy is not bad for your health. It's actually good for your health. And I think our We Eat Balanced campaign is one way we need to reach out more to the Muslim community and the general population to show them that, yes, it's good to eat meat in moderation, but it is very important for your health.
So, Awal, you've mentioned a couple of times about the importance of, I suppose, like the occasion and kind of like the formality of it, but both from a cultural perspective, but obviously then from a kind of almost like a fundamental supply and demand perspective through the meat industry. The religious festivals are an extremely important time, aren't they, in terms of lamb consumption, but how that then filters through into sort of market impact?
Yeah, so for processors, it's important to know the timings of the religious festival, because that is when the consumption of halal meat peaks. So if we take Ramadan, for instance, it will be March next year, 2025. So Ramadan, during that time, Muslims do not consume meat during food during daylight hours. But when they break their fast, they want to take in as much protein as possible. So a lot of lamb is consumed during that time. And immediately after Ramadan, there is what we call Eid al-Fitr. It's one of the Eid festivals, and it's the smaller Eid. So during that time too, Muslims will start shopping maybe 5 days before that time. So it's very, very important. Then the biggest one is Qurbani or Eid al-Adha. During that time, every financially capable Muslim must pay for an animal to be processed on their behalf. And we've said in previous conversations that the animal must be sexually mature. So for lamb, the animal must be 6 months old. For cattle, it must be 24 months. For camel, I know we don't do camel in this country, it must be 5 years. Yeah, so you need to, and poultry cannot be used. And during that time, we know prices do go up. This year, for instance, Muslims were paying around £400 per carcass of sheep. So it is very important for our farmers, and it's also important for markets. Most of the livestock markets are well aware of the festival, so when it is coming, they prepare very well for it. So farmers need to be able to identify when the opportunities are. And there's another important ceremony called Akika. Akika is when Muslims give birth to a new baby. After 7 days, they pay an abattoir for an animal to be processed. In Islam, you cannot just name a baby without any sacrifice. You need to pay money for the abattoir to process the animal on your behalf before you can name the baby. So that is also an important segment that abattoirs need to be aware of. And they need to be aware that, look, it comes very shortly and it comes all year round. So it's one they can take advantage of.
And as you mentioned there, in terms of religious festivals, that was exactly the reason why we saw those, super strong, both old season and then the start of the new season lamb prices earlier this year, where we had the new season lamb prices starting at over £9 a kilo. It's because we had the promotions that started pretty much a year ago now, leading up to Christmas last year. So from a Christian religious festival, it was leading into Christmas. Those promotions then carried on because people were aiming for, obviously, from a Christian festival of Easter and people buying legs of lamb. And then with Kobani coming soon after that period, it was just a continual roll of promotion met with strong demand, which just created that extremely tight market. And then from like you said, a farming levy payer basis, and it comes through. So that's I suppose the pure economic reason in my mind why having, we're not saying there needs to be kind of like a day-to-day understanding of, halal meat consumption, but from both a processing levy payer but a farmer levy payer, understanding, I suppose, the key dates of these festivals is then important, because it then links in with those, the peak and trough, as it were, of the lamb trade as it goes through the year. Understanding that process is important. So, Vanessa, one thing that I was thinking as we were talking about that was around the actual spend, as how I was talking there about purchasing whole carcasses. How does that then translate into the weekly spend and the sort of the steady narrative of spend through the year?
Yeah, well, we wanted to look at, say, the everyday purchasing trends. We asked the Muslim consumers what's their average spend per week, and this came out across the whole research as they spend on average £49.20 per week on their halal meat purchase. And when we compare this with our YouGov tracker data, this only came out as £19.46. So, there's a massive difference there between the heavy Muslim meat buyers and the general meat buyers within the population. So this just shows how important this sector of the market is to protecting the red meat industry.
Thank you, Vanessa. If there's ever a headline to end on, I think that's it. So thank you, Vanessa and Awal, for all of your comments. And we can say we've been successful after a bit of an iffy period with trying to get song titles in, where I'm not going to lie, we've struggled. We've been successful. And I'm glad that we didn't go for the headline song titles that would have given it away. We went for the slightly more obscure ones, which I think people would find very difficult. But this week's artist was the man himself, Jon Bon Jovi. I mean, we've all been there, haven't we, enjoying Jon Bon Jovi? It's a guilty pleasure, isn't it, a bit of Bon Jovi? Didn't he save someone off a bridge recently that was going to potentially, am I making that up, jump off a bridge? Exactly, he does more than music, he's a humanitarian as well. Love the bloke. Thank you, Awal and Vanessa, for talking through that. All of the information from our report is available on the AHDB website, and if you're looking for some recipe inspiration for this week, our Simply Beef and Simply Lamb websites are the place to go. I'm definitely going to be heading there myself.